In April 1975, crew members aboard American aircraft carriers and Navy vessels witnessed an incredible sight. Navy personnel pushing what appeared to be working helicopters overboard. The event must have seemed like an unbelievable spectacle. Those flight decks were overcrowded with civilian refugees. As time passed, more helicopters landed, and soon there was no more room on the flight deck. It became increasingly crowded and dangerous with each passing moment. Those Navy personnel made a difficult decision and started ditching aircraft over the side into the South China Sea. Hello, this is Russell and welcome to Anything History. This remarkable moment in history was the culmination of Operation Frequent Wind. It was the United States' effort to evacuate at-risk personnel from South Vietnam at the very end of the Vietnam War, and the chaos of that day reflected the desperate nature of the evacuation. The American evacuation plan led from Saigon to the United States Navy's Task Force 76, stationed some 17 miles off the Vung Tau Peninsula in the South China Sea. Task Force 76 was made up of 25 Navy vessels supporting the evacuation, led by the USS Blue Ridge and supported by the carriers USS Hancock and USS Midway. Evacuation of dependents and non-essential personnel had begun in late March using C-141 and C-5 aircraft. However, as the military situation in South Vietnam became more tenuous, more civilians crowded into the evacuation areas. By the 18th of April, the United States and Task Force 76 began assembling off of Vung Tau, ready to assist in the evacuation of those at-risk personnel. On April 29th and 30th, 1975, American helicopters had finished the last evacuations from the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. By then, the situation had become desperate. Saigon had fallen, and those who helped the U.S. during the war were considered by the government to be at risk. U.S. Navy personnel were unprepared for the number of people who were able to escape South Vietnam and reach the Naval Task Force at sea. This extraordinary event was facilitated by the large number of aircraft the South Vietnamese pilots used to ferry civilians to the evacuation area at sea. The pilots of the Republic of Vietnam Air Force, flying out of South Vietnam towards the American fleet, were carrying civilian passengers in a desperate attempt to escape. As the days wore on, the flight decks became increasingly crowded as civilian personnel, their possessions, and aircraft crowded the flight decks. While the aerial evacuation was underway, thousands of Vietnamese refugees swarmed Task Force 76 on anything that could float. This included 26 Republic of Vietnam Navy vessels with over 30,000 sailors and their families on board. As more refugees continued to arrive, the situation became more chaotic. The personnel of Task Force 76 began to scramble to accommodate everyone on board. They reached a point where there was simply no more room for helicopters, and the decision was made to start pushing the helicopters overboard. To be clear, most of the helicopters you see here were property of the Republic of Vietnam. The pilots of these helicopters were instructed by the Navy to drop their passengers off on the flight deck and then ditch their helicopters into the ocean. But as you can imagine, many were reluctant to do so. These pilots took desperate risks. One pilot even leapt from his helicopter after dropping off evacuees, causing the uncontrolled aircraft to strike the side of the USS Blue Ridge before hitting the ocean. Another incident occurred when a Cessna aircraft attempted to land on the aircraft carrier USS Midway. The pilot was on board with his wife and 5 children. The commanding officer of the Midway ordered the flight deck to be cleared, pushing some $10 million of UH-1 Huey helicopters into the South China Sea. With the flight deck cleared, the Cessna 01 aircraft landed safely. By April 30th, Task Force 76 had pulled away from Vietnam, continuing to pick up refugees along the way. In total, 45 UH-1 helicopters and 1 CH-47 Chinook were pushed overboard. Despite the material losses involved, Operation Frequent Wind should be considered a success. The helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, and Republic of Vietnam Navy vessels of Task Force 76 successfully evacuated over 50,000 Vietnamese refugees, Americans, and other nationalities from Vietnam. Despite the chaos, Operation Frequent Wind was a necessary and well-executed evacuation that saved thousands of American and South Vietnamese lives. It also marked the end of a long and contentious war and the beginning of a new era for both Vietnam and the United States. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel out.